Okay, I think we'll get started now. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Obviously, the topic of today is ransomware and to pay or not to pay. We're joined by David Tweedale, who's the Strategic Channel Account Manager from Mimecast. A little bit of housekeeping. So we'll be recording, as you may see, we'll be recording the webinar. We'll be sending the recording to everyone afterwards. Any questions you have throughout, please feel free to put them in the chat. And we'll probably put them to David at the end of the webinar. And any questions you have, think of after the webinar, then feel free to reach out to Cobweb, and we will hopefully be able to help you with your queries. So over to you, David.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Richard. Good morning, everybody, and thanks so much for joining today's session. And to any of you that also joined the opening session of this webinar series, which was just a few weeks ago, when my colleague Francis talked about the threat landscape and the things that keep him awake at night, then of course, welcome back and thanks again for joining us. As Richard said, my name is David, and I'm a Senior Channel Manager here at Mimecast. I've just hit my 7-year anniversary, actually, which is great. And my role is to work with our top MSP partners, which includes Cobweb, who are, in fact, our largest and most successful UK managed service provider. And Cobweb have asked me today to talk about and focus on the topic of ransomware. And I'm sure many of you already know it's an extremely topical subject at the moment. You only have to glance at the news to see the latest example of a ransomware attack that's affected either a private or public sector organization. And most of us probably know now that it's usually an uneducated end user that's made a mistake and fallen into a trap that actually causes the ransomware breach. So they're the kind of things that we're going to speak about today. And in terms of our agenda, I'm going to start by just spending a few minutes outlining exactly what ransomware is for anybody that has probably heard the term but isn't quite sure. And then we're going to discuss some of the methods that cyber criminals tend to use when they're delivering ransomware down to you guys as end users. And then we're going to focus a little bit on why, since 2020, there's been such a prevalent risk of ransomware to organizations, and a big problem that lots of customers like yourselves have really focused on trying to mitigate. Then to close off the session, I'll finish by giving you 10 top tips for preventing a ransomware attack on your organization. And I promise it's not going to be loads of Mimecast product stuff and technical jargon, but just some general practical advice for you to consider as you go away from this session, and perhaps some areas that you want to explore with ourselves and with Cobweb, and as you reflect on the session later in the week and of course moving forwards. Because if any of those 10 things resonate with you, if there are areas that you're already thinking about or perhaps are going to think about in the near future, then please reach out to Cobweb immediately after the session and we can book in some time to talk through them in more detail. So that's the brief agenda. Let's jump straight in then. What is ransomware? Now, is anybody brave enough to give it a stab themselves? Like, I know you're on mute, but if you're feeling brave, stick it in the chat. Like, I'd love to know what people understand ransomware to be or what it means. No pressure if we're feeling a little bit shy on a Wednesday morning. No problem. I'll tell you exactly what it is. At its core, ransomware is essentially a type of cyber extortion or blackmail. And what it does is it relies on clever malware, which is called ransomware, and it's often contained in emails. And what it essentially aims to do is encrypt an organization's corporate data. So when the ransomware is enabled, an encryption key prevents access to key systems, files, and databases. So unless you know that encryption key, you can no longer access the information which is absolutely essential to your business. So it puts hackers in a really, really commanding position to potentially extort you. Now, why do hackers take this approach? Well, it's because corporate data is really, really important. We all need it. It's your business's DNA, it's your intellectual property, it's your operational handbook, it's everything all in one. It literally is the most important thing that any organization has is their corporate data. And what that means is if people lose it or they feel like their data is at risk, they'll pretty much do anything to get it back. So, and hackers know this and they understand this is a great way to exploit you as customers. So once the malware has been enabled and it's done its work, that data has been encrypted, you essentially have a choice to make. You can either pay a ransom, which is being asked by the malware that's been successfully executed, or you can try and find a way to access your data differently and perhaps recover that data from a different source if you have it. And then I suppose the third option, which is probably the least attractive, is that you can do nothing and you can just start from scratch, accept that data is gone and then build from the start, which is really unacceptable to almost every customer that we speak to every single day. So it's a really good approach from hackers, right? They get you to what's most important to you, and they make it really, really difficult to access what is yours and what you need to run your business. So then you have a choice: you either pay or potentially lose that data. But surely this is something that only the big brand names need to worry about, right? Or absolutely not. It's really, really important that everybody on this call recognizes that all organizations are at risk. Everybody on this call could, and actually probably has already been targeted with a ransomware attack. Now, while it's true that some of the most sophisticated attacks, often the ones that pop up in the news and that we see on the telly all the time, target large enterprises or perhaps some government bodies or public sector organizations, because the reward is potentially greater, small to medium businesses are consistently and constantly being compromised by ransomware as well. And actually, they're often the target for cyber criminals because they're the ones with the slightly softer bellies. Cyber criminals can rack up a high volume of smaller value targets rather than going for that one big one that may or may not be successful, doesn't necessarily get the hacker the return of investment. Not to mention the fact that actually, small to medium businesses, like many of the customers on this call, often do business with large corporates. So for a cyber criminal, they may well see a smaller organization as a stepping stone onto the next target that the threat actors want to try and compromise next. So now that we know what it is and who the targets are, let's have a think about the different ways in which an organization might get caught out by a ransomware attack. The reality is that email is probably going to be right at the top of the list when answering this one. It's currently estimated that something like 94% of IT breaches start off with an email-based attack. And that's despite the explosion of new technologies like Zoom, Slack, and Teams. Email remains the #1 communications platform for most organizations, and therefore it's the most direct route to your data via your users. It gives cyber criminals a clear shot at the weakest link in almost every organization, which is your employees. Modern targeted email attacks use sophisticated methods that are specifically designed to disguise their intentions, bypass traditional spam filters, and compromise your end users by encouraging them to make a mistake. And actually, because lots of organizations are still using quite primitive spam and virus-only security tools, it's often quite easy for cyber criminals to try and do this. Now, chronologically speaking, the first kind of phishing attack, and often we see ransomware hidden in these kinds of attacks, was what we call a URL-based attack. Now, we're not talking spam and viruses here. We're talking about a very, very targeted email that's designed to go past traditional security systems like Exchange Online Protection and entices the end user to make a mistake. Oops. Apologies, fat fingers hitting the keyboard as I'm talking and gesticulating. They're often very well written emails, right? They look like they're coming from a familiar source. So you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, I've actually created a mock of a phishing email and sent it to myself. This one's purporting to look like Microsoft. And as you can see, the messaging is really, really strong. It's very formal. There's been some unusual sign-in activity. Here's some information which looks really real. This is really important. Please, can you click here? To solve the problem, right? So they slip through the spam filter, lands in the user's inbox. They're convinced it's real and it's coming from a familiar source. So of course, the first thing they're going to do is click on that URL link and follow the instructions that they've been given. Now, what we know is that cyber criminals will often embed these URLs, or certainly the websites that sit behind them, with ransomware. So the second that you click on that link and you land on that web page, ransomware is downloaded via your browser. It lands on your desktop. Your data is encrypted, and you have, again, that question: do I pay the ransom, or do I try and do something else to get myself out of trouble? Now, the question I'd ask you guys to ask yourselves as you sit on this call is, how confident are you really that your users would definitely decline to click on an example like the one you can see on your screen? And actually, how easy would it be for you to identify who is more or less likely to click on these links? Because lots of people are very unsure, actually, that they've got the visibility or awareness to understand whether their users are likely to fall for this kind of trap. And hackers know this, and that's why they're so prevalent with these kinds of URL-based attacks. The next, and in many ways the favorite route for ransomware delivery specifically, comes in the form of weaponized attachments. And part of the reason why is because 40% of the time when we receive an email that contains an attachment, we'll actually open the attachment before we've even read the body of the email or even checked who it's from, right? We're curious people. And if the hackers have done a good job and they've sent something that's relevant, So the example you can see on your screen is to do with COVID. That's very topical. That's exactly the sort of technique that a cyber criminal is going to use. And actually, I'm really, really likely to click and open that attachment because I think it's really important for me to do so. Other techniques the hackers might use is perhaps send somebody in finance an invoice, or send somebody in sales a PO. Send attachments that are really relevant to the specific role of the person that they're targeting, because they've done that social engineering in the background to make sure that it is successful. Yeah. And 40% of the time, that's staggering. And what it means is it's an incredibly reliable way to trick an end user and get them to click on that attachment and enable the ransomware. So what will happen if I do make an error and I decide to open that attachment is I'll be asked usually, do I want to enable content or enable macros? Most of us have seen this when we've used Excel sheets or PowerPoints before, so we're not frightened by it. We click yes, because of course we want to open the document. And then at some point in the near future, not always instantly, sometimes it can be days or weeks down the line, ransomware that's been downloaded on your machine by enabling those macros is activated, and then suddenly your data is encrypted. And again, we have that question, do we pay or do we try and do something else to recover our data? So they're probably the two of many, but two of the most common and most prevalent techniques that hackers will use to try and deliver ransomware down to your end users to compromise your data. But I guess the next question is, why is this so prevalent at the moment? Because I'm sure you guys will acknowledge it's not just Mimecast that's talking about this. I'm sure that many of you have sat on webinars before, perhaps from other vendors or different people that you work with, or even just had conversations with your colleagues and peers about this ransomware problem. It certainly feels like a very current issue, doesn't it? Well, that's partly probably to do with the COVID-19 pandemic, because the pandemic and the immediate shift towards working from home and hybrid working has really been pounced on by cyber criminals as an opportunity that they can take advantage of. We talk about this a lot in our latest State of Email Security report, and I'll make sure that the Cobweb team shares this with you immediately after today's session, because a lot of the stats and figures that I've quoted so far and will continue to quote throughout are included. And I think it's a really, really useful read if you want a broad understanding of the email threat landscape and some of the challenges that you may well see over a couple of years previous and also the couple of years ahead. So I'll make sure that that's shared afterwards. But anyway, the point is, the COVID-19 pandemic has shifted us into a very digital age. More and more critical information is being shared across platforms like Zoom, Teams, and of course email than ever before, partly because we're substituting the time that we typically would have been face-to-face previously. And this well of digital activity has just given cyber criminals more and more opportunities to create socially engineered attacks, including those using ransomware, like the couple of examples that we've just seen. Something to reinforce that, our Threat Intelligence Center, so Francis, who heads up our Threat Intelligence team, who spoke to a couple of weeks ago, we recognize that actually there's been a 64% increase in total threat volume between 2019 and 2020 when the pandemic struck. And we can see continued trends in that direction ever since. So yep, another thing that we can blame COVID on for sure. Now, the other offshoot of the COVID pandemic is allowing hackers to pick a target carefully, right? And a prime target for cyber criminals is those of us that immediately and for some permanently shifted to a work from home setup. Why? Well, because they're the sorts of people that are very unlikely to have as secure a setup as they may have done previously. Very few of us have got as good a router and firewall and network and connectivity as we may have done when we were in the office. Very few users bother to connect to a VPN or even know that they're supposed to do that when they're working from their Wi-Fi at home. And dare I say it, I think most of us that have adjusted to a work from home life have probably spent slightly more time than they previously did on things like Facebook or accessing non-work stuff on corporate devices. It's simple human nature. When boss isn't looking over your shoulder, maybe we procrastinate slightly more. Not me, of course, but there we go. But it's also a mindset shift that we need to be mindful of. When people are working from home, their attention is divided between work and what they're doing as part of their occupation, but also all of the distractions around them. And at the start of the pandemic, this is at its height, with people battling with homeschooling and so on and so forth. And hackers took advantage of this change in mindset. Ultimately, it's quite difficult for us to expect that all employees have the same security conscious mindset when they're cuddled at home with a dog on the sofa, and working in that frame of mind, as opposed to when they're in the office, in their suit and tie with their badge around their neck, and they're actually in that kind of, real, I'm at work, I should be security conscious mindset. And again, we can see this impact across our customer base. Since the onset of the pandemic in early 2020, our users are clicking on 3 times as many malicious emails as they were previously. Now, yes, that's probably partly because there's been an increase in phishing-based, URL-based phishing attacks, but actually, a lot of that 300% increase is actually because of the difference in mindset of people working from home or in a hybrid working environment compared to when people were in the groove of coming into the office and having that mindset. So it's easy to see why the post-pandemic IT world is going to be really, really attractive to any young upstart in cyber criminal activities. Now, on the one hand, we've got changes to the way that we work because of the pandemic, and that's creating that's giving hackers greater opportunities to attack more vulnerable people with lower defenses. But on the other hand, what's creating a multiplier effect is the fact that it's becoming easier and easier for people to put together sophisticated cyber attacks that are actually quite difficult to track. And many of the state-sponsored attacks that we've seen over the last few years are opening up new concepts and bringing awareness to new concepts to perhaps less trained cyber criminals, and actually creating new malware delivery mechanisms that otherwise amateur hackers would have probably struggled to put together. So we're even now seeing malware creation becoming a business opportunity for the bright ones. Has anybody here heard of Ransomware as a service, or RAAS in the wonderful world of acronyms that IT has become? Well, essentially, what that means is rather than an individual needing any coding skill and needing to know anything about IT themselves, you now have the option to essentially hire a very clever person who will sell you ransomware as a service. They'll create the code for you, they'll launch the attack for you, they'll collect the results, and then you pay them a Bitcoin and you give them a commission for anything that you earn if the target actually does indeed open that ransomware open the ransomware and then later pay the ransom. If you're not sure about this, or you think it sounds a little bit far-fetched, I'd really encourage you to read about the ransomware as a service called RYUK, which was created by a group called Wizard Spider. It's probably the most successful ransomware as a service that we've seen over the last couple of years, and by the end of 2020, it's believed that they'd collected something like $150 million in ransom. So have a look at that and have a read through if it's something that you're not familiar with. Now, of course, the other thing that I just touched on briefly is cryptocurrencies. What's making this even easier is this uptake in crypto. It's untraceable, it's unregulated, so I can buy the ransomware, collect my ransom, and pay that ransomware as a service their cut using an untraceable, unregulated currency. So the chance of getting caught out is much, much, much smaller than it would have done a couple of years previously, before cryptocurrencies became as popular as they are today. So a brave new world, perhaps, but it's certainly the case that new technologies and easier access to them is creating a dangerous new world for all of us that are on this call. Now, finally, and really unfortunately, one of the reasons that ransomware is and is likely to continue to be a particular concern to all of us, and particularly popular for threat actors, is because it really just works. As we spoke about earlier, one of the simplest ways to crush an organization is to remove its access to its data. Now, and yes, that might seem more important for a lawyer or an insurer than perhaps some other industries, but it's a problem that none of us can avoid. Anybody running a business requires their corporate data to be able to function correctly. So taking that data away from an organization is a fantastic way to cripple them. So ransomware is typically successful. It's a really, really good way of catching people out. And again, we can see that across the customers that we surveyed as part of our State of Email Security report. And we identified that last year, 61% of the customers we surveyed had experienced a ransom attack in 12 months before. Of those customers, despite guidance from both public and private sector, 52% of them did actually pay the ransom because they had no other way of getting their data back. But really, unfortunately, only 34% of those customers actually got their data back after paying. So this is obviously not a position that we can allow ourselves to be in. So I guess we should think about what we should try and do about it. Now, the question we really need to ask ourselves is what strategies can we put in place so that we're never faced with the dilemma as to whether or not to pay the ransom? It should never go that far, because what we should be aspiring to do is create a cyber resilience strategy that gives us the best possible chance of preventing an attack before it happens, that allows us to keep the lights on if we ever do get caught while that incident or downtime is occurring, and crucially, a strategy that allows us to protect and recover any data that may have been compromised or lost in a successful attack. So we don't have to pay the ransom, we have that plan B, and we can recover that data when we need it. So let's have a think about a few things that we can do. And in fact, for the sake of round numbers, here's 10 things and 10 ways that we could mitigate the risk of a ransomware attack. So first, we harden your email perimeter. Prevention is always better than cure. The best way to prevent ransomware is to block as many malicious emails as possible. And the best way to do this is to use a mature, cloud-based, secure email gateway that includes advanced inbound, outbound, and internal scanning. Doing modern email security and doing it really, really well. For those of you that are using 365, the best thing to do is to layer something on top of 365. Put that advanced email security tool that wraps around on top of that to complement that investment in 365, because ultimately 2 clouds better than 1, especially when we're thinking about security. Secondly, archive to an independent, separately secured environment. The ability to protect and preserve corporate data can provide you with a greater degree of control in the worst case scenario of a successful ransomware attack, whilst following the best practice of maintaining a lean amount of data in your live mailbox environment can actually help reduce your exposure in your attack surface. So the advice here is keep your live mailboxes lean, keep 365 nice and lean, but really, really importantly, keep a second, totally independent archive of all of that email data completely separate from the live mailbox environment. Yeah? So just like the old days of storing, one copy on a hard drive and a second one on a disk and tape in a different part of the office, or even at the IT manager's house, if stuff's important, keep 2 copies of it and keep those completely independent from one another. Build resilience with integrated recovery capabilities. Our research shows that the full recovery time from a successful ransomware attack is an average of nearly 270 days. And this is partly because many organizations simply struggle to retrieve, recover, and restore data that's lost, stolen, and compromised from incidents like ransomware. So it's really, really important to look for solutions that will give you the ability to quickly and easily restore mailboxes to a specific point in time, i.e. revert back to that safe place before the ransomware attack hit. So you've got that, that previously good copy of all of your data. Establish an email continuity plan, and actually a business continuity plan generally. Disruption to mail flow is a reality that all organizations must face and they must plan for, and it can happen for lots of reasons, and ransomware is definitely one of them. Particularly if you are unfortunate enough to suffer an attack and require a bit of a rebuilding job to get the lights going again and allow people to continue working. Now, during that recovery period, we can't afford for email to be down. It's mission critical. It's our #1 communications platform. It's where most of our transactions take place these days. Think about how POs and invoices are shared. And we spoke earlier about how crucial email remains. So we can't afford for there to be downtime. So a strong business continuity strategy that allows your users to continue to access email accounts, even when there is downtime at an Exchange or Office 365 level, is crucially important to being resilient against the threat of ransomware. Limit hackers' ability to craft highly targeted attacks. Highly targeted attacks these days typically involve imitating or impersonating a brand or using personal information, and they're very, very difficult for even the most sophisticated or well-versed of users to detect. To fight against this, 2 things to look out for are technologies that assist with the implementation of DMARC, which is a tool that a policy that helps prevent spoofing. And then secondly, technologies that use something called identity graphing. There's 2 things to look out for as you do your research after the session. Number 6 is employ new technologies to improve the detection of sophisticated attacks. Artificial intelligence and especially machine learning are playing a growing role in cybersecurity technologies, and they can be a highly effective means of bolstering capabilities of solutions that leverage them. The most common application to date, and the way lots of vendors are doing this at the moment, is using machine learning to recognize patterns and use those patterns to build on that knowledge over time. The more knowledge that the AI platform can have, the more detection rates can improve over time. But please remember, artificial intelligence isn't a silver bullet that solves all problems. It's just one unique and important component of a strong cybersecurity and cyber resilience strategy. Around end users with support, and this one is really, really important. When threats break through, security teams have no choice but to rely on the most unpredictable form of protection, which is our end users, human beings. So it's really, really important that we give them the knowledge and the tools that they need to make better decisions, so they can be a human firewall of sorts, rather than arguably the weakest link in the organization, which is why they're being targeted in the first place. Now, the benefits of a cybersecurity awareness training platform are many, but they're most effectively deployed as part of an overall strategy, not a one-off event once a year that's done to tick a box. So make sure that security awareness training is a part of your IT security strategy, not just something on the side. Maintain good patching hygiene. Listen, it really goes without saying, but still bears repeating that good patching hygiene is essential to reducing the risk of all types of cyber attacks, including ransomware. So keeping an inventory of your assets, monitoring for patches, and establishing clear prioritization processes are just foundational steps that all of us need to be doing. Number 9, protect against drive-by download infections. Now, malicious file downloads can open the door to ransomware attacks that are very difficult to detect. We looked at a couple of examples earlier, in particular attachments. There's lots of different ones, often utilizing file sharing websites. So you click on a link, go through to Dropbox and download an attachment that you think is for you. There's lots of different ways that this can happen. Now, there's a technology known as browser isolation that can reduce this risk. And the way that it works is by executing files remotely in a container or in the cloud to keep malware infections away from users' computers, devices, and networks. Doing this will also really help to eliminate the patient zero problem. If it is a zero-day threat, it's never been seen before, it's not going to be picked up by a blacklist, an antivirus level, and browser isolation can really help to containerize potential threats. And finally, monitor and control shadow IT. The new digital workplace that we spoke about earlier has blurred the lines between the professional and the personal, and it's reduced the ability of IT and security teams to maintain control. Insecure websites, poorly secured home Wi-Fi, and unsecured file sharing sites all increase risk to your business. And application visibility and control capabilities can really help. And generally, actually, having a robust web security strategy is a really, really important thing to consider. Because whilst 94% of attacks start off with email, as we said earlier, about 92% of them are executing via the web. So it's really, really important that we've got the visibility and control of what our users are doing when they're browsing the internet and what applications they're using, particularly when they're working from home and they're away from the safety of the corporate network. So we'll make sure this is shared around with you after today's session. But as a quick recap, I'll just read through the 10 pieces of advice. Harden your email perimeter, archive to an independent, separately secured environment, build resilience with integrated recovery capabilities, establish an email continuity plan, limit attackers' ability to craft highly targeted attacks, employ new technologies to improve the detection of sophisticated attacks, surround end users with support, maintain good patching hygiene, protect against drive-by download infections, and finally, monitor and control shadow IT. Now, I did promise at the start of this session that I wouldn't really delve in any great detail into products and services, and I'm going to stick by that pledge. However, I did want to give you just one slide, which I think encapsulates Mimecast's approach to help keeping our customers safe from threats like ransomware, as we've spoken about today. Now, the solution framework that you can see on your screen now demonstrates our commitment to what we call cyber resilience, not just email security. And as per the 10 tips that we just walked through, is this resilience messaging that's absolutely key. We provide our customers with solutions across multiple email security layers to help give them the best possible chance of preventing an attack before it happens. But we can also help them to ensure that email remains available during a difficult event, plan maintenance, or enforced downtime with our business continuity tools. We have got tools that help mitigate the risks of shadow IT and web-based threats, that we've spoken about on points, I think number 9 and 10. And finally, and really importantly, we provide an approach to email archiving that ensures that if there is a successful ransomware attack that penetrates our customers' defenses, the data is preserved, it's kept separately from their live mailbox environment, and they can restore and recover that data very, very quickly and easily. Because in our view, the best way to prevent and mitigate the risk of ransomware is with cyber resilience, combining this before, during, and after approach to keeping your business safe. So as I said earlier, if you'd like to have a conversation about any of these top 10 tips, if anything really resonates with you as being particularly worrying or something that you really want to deal with quite urgently for your business, then please do reach out to your account manager at Cobweb, drop them a note and they can set up a call. And if you've looked at those 10 things and you thought, really this is quite overwhelming, there's lots of things to do, then please do bear in mind that Cobweb can offer services in all of these different areas and deliver those down to you guys as a managed service. And Mimecast is a crucial tenant of the service that they can provide as Cobweb. So please do reach directly to Cobweb. They'll set up a call with me and my team if there's anything that really sticks out. And that includes, if you're looking at the solution framework, you're looking at those 10 things together and you want to try and see if you can map the problems and the pieces of advice that we've given to the different products and services that Mimecast can offer, because there is something across most of those 10 items. So thank you very much for your time and attention. Feel free, if there are any questions, to put them in the chat box. Like, hopefully I'll be able to answer them. So yeah, I'll let anyone ask any questions.
That's brilliant. Thank you, David. That's a really, really interesting presentation. It can be quite an overwhelming subject, I know, for many people, but yeah, certainly in a very understandable format that you presented it, and hopefully that's given some people food for thought and that sort of thing. Question I've got is, you've also got different levels within Mimecast, like S1 and S2. Is there a minimum level that you would suggest that people should have now within a business?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think 2 or 3 slides ago, I said the most important thing to do if you want to reduce the threat of ransomware is to try and block malicious emails, right? So the bare minimum that you need is inbound security to stop nasty things coming in, internal security. So if something does slip in through a back door, you don't spread it across to your colleagues, but also outbound security. So if you have an infection, you don't pass it on to any of your customers or partners. So the bare minimum that I think any organization should be doing is that, and the product at the moment that encapsulates that is Mimecast S2. But really, I think big picture. Email security is just one piece of the puzzle. Really, we need those continuity and archiving pieces to really protect ourselves. Particularly if there's a 0-day threat and something does go wrong. So M3RA is going to cover all of those different elements and give you what we call cyber resilience, which is the most important part of this message.
Fantastic. It doesn't look like we've got any other questions coming in, but David, I'd like to thank you very, very much for that presentation, and wish you a great holiday, because I know you're off to Florida tonight, I believe it is.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Anybody who wants any sort of follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to account managers or to the sales at cobweb.com, or give us a call, and we'll be sending out the presentation, the recording, shortly after this afternoon. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, guys.